It is 7 o'clock. Good to see you this morning. The sooner we finish, the better. The words of President Biden last night as he said the US is on course to end evacuations from Kabul by Tuesday. This morning, reports that the UK's evacuation flights may have to stop this week after Boris Johnson failed to secure an extension to the deadline for Western forces to leave. But he is keen for the Taliban to secure the safe passage of refugees from the country. Plenty then to discuss with the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab in just a couple of moments. Also on the programme, going all the way to highlight plastic pollution. I'll be speaking to the swimmer and environmental campaigner Ollie Rush as he becomes just the 5th person to swim around the Isle of Wight. Also ahead...
We got magic to do, just for you. We got miracle plays to play.
We're going to be joined by Stephen Schwartz, one of theatre's most successful composers, as the West End pays tribute to the man responsible for some of their biggest ever hits. It is Wednesday, 25th of August. Kabul countdown reports this morning that the UK's evacuation flights from Afghanistan may need to stop by the end of the week, as President Biden says the US is on course to finish operations by August the 31st.
We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better.
Police! Don't move! Police! Stop! Police!
On the ground, in the air and at sea, Sky News on patrol with French police funded by the UK as they try to stop migrants from crossing the Channel. Ecosystem engineers. Why it's hoped the reintroduction of beavers into the English countryside could be good for the environment. Off to a winning start. Dame Sarah Storey wins her 15th ever gold to give Great Britain their first medal at the Tokyo Paralympics. And the tributes keep rolling as the biggest names in music salute drummer Charlie Watts.
And once again, it looks like it's going to be another fine and dry day. For some, temperatures could get up to 28 degrees Celsius. I'll have the details for you later.
Morning all. In a late-night press conference at the White House, President Biden repeated his intention for US troops to end the rescue operation at Kabul airport. Thousands of people are leaving Afghanistan every day to escape the new Taliban regime. The US leader rejected proposals from G7 leaders, including the Prime Minister, to extend operations beyond the current deadline of August the 31st. Reports this morning say UK flights may well stop by the end of the week. We'll be speaking to the Foreign Secretary in just a couple of minutes. But first, this report from our US correspondent, Mark Stone.
Each leader had their own image from the virtual G7 meeting, and together the idea was a show of strength and unity. There has, after all, been little of either this past week. Led by Boris Johnson, the consensus was to persuade President Biden that more time was needed to complete the withdrawal. They wanted an extension to the August 31st deadline. The American president disagreed.
We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops. But the completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate.
Of course, invidious as it may be, delaying the US departure wasn't a decision President Biden could make without a guarantee from the Taliban that it would continue to cooperate with America. The president is being advised from the ground that an attack against coalition forces is a growing danger. And from the Taliban spokesman, the message couldn't have been clearer.
31st is the time given, and after that, it's something that's been against the agreement. All people should be removed prior to that date.
And that is why dialogue between America, their intermediaries, and the Taliban is absolutely key. It's striking that it was the CIA director who met the leader of the Taliban this week in Kabul. That shows just how high level these talks are. The Qataris will also play a key role in the days ahead. My understanding is that they are doing all they can, if not to extend that deadline, then at least to allow safe passage of people to continue after the Americans have left. In the absence of any progress there, the British Prime Minister is looking longer term.
We've got together the leading Western powers and agreed not just a joint approach to dealing with the evacuation, but also a roadmap for the way in which we're going to engage with the Taliban.
Yet from the UN's human rights chief, a grim assessment of the reality.
Summary executions of civilians and all the combat members of the Afghan National Security Forces. Restrictions on the right of women, including the right to move around freely and girls' right to attend school. Recruitment of child soldiers and repression of peaceful protests and expression of dissent.
The US president has been consistent throughout this process, holding his position through such chaos.
Mr. President, can you guarantee every American will be out before the troops leave?
Now it is the Taliban apparently calling the shots over the coalition withdrawal. Mark Stone, Sky News at the White House.
Very pleased to say we're once again joined in the studio by the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab. Mr Raab, good to see you this morning.
Good morning.
Clearly, there is an awful lot to discuss in terms of Afghanistan moving forward, but we do need to go back to last week, to the tail end of last week. On Friday, Kabul was, we now know, 48 hours from being taken over by the Taliban. You spoke to the Prime Minister from your holiday on Friday. What was the content of that conversation?
Well, look, I'm not going to go into all of the details. Those are private conversations. But what we were overwhelmingly focused on with the COBRA meetings, the meetings I had with the director running the emergency response, and indeed the international engagement that I was focused on, is two things. Securing the airport so that evacuation flights could come in and out. Secondly, boosting our teams on the ground. We now have 19 Foreign Office officials, many Home Office officials, so we can process not just the UK nationals, but the Afghans who worked for us. And I would just say this, if you look from that date forward, over 9,000 people have been given safe passage to the UK. I don't think there's been an airlift on that scale, that level of complexity in living memory.
Indeed, and we will dwell on that as well during this interview. But you were 3 days away on Friday from making your way back to the United Kingdom.
I came back on Sunday evening, actually.
Indeed, sorry, apologies too. What was the intelligence assessment on Friday of how long it would take the Taliban to take over the capital of Afghanistan?
Well, I don't go into the specific intelligence, but we don't discuss intelligence matters and operational assessments. But I can tell you this, and it's been clear all along, clearly the scale and pace of the fall of Kabul came as a surprise to everyone around the world, not just Western powers like the UK and the US, but when I was speaking to the Qataris, the Pakistanis, I think even the Taliban was surprised. But of course, we can learn those lessons with hindsight. We dealt with the reality that we saw it.
But in terms of the conversation that you had with the Prime Minister, had you been ordered to come back to the United Kingdom, to be at your desk for the fall of Kabul, did you lobby the Prime Minister to work remotely?
All of those claims and suggestions are not true. Well, we discussed the matter. I agreed to come back on Sunday. I'm not going to add further to the speculation around that. But the idea, some of the reporting, some of the assertions you just put to me, just not true. But we were focused overwhelmingly on securing the airport, making sure, and I was engaged in meetings, the stuff about me being lounging around on the beach all day, just nonsense. The stuff about me paddleboarding, nonsense. The sea was actually closed. It was a red notice. I was focused on the COBRA meetings, the Foreign Office team, the Director and the Director General, and the international engagement. And as a result of the actions of the government, 9,000 people, British nationals, Afghan workers, were secured back to the UK.
But the reason this is significant is demonstrated by a poll in the Mail this morning, which shows a majority of people want you to lose your job for not coming back from your holiday. The fact that, as the Commons debate demonstrated, there are people within your own party who feel the government was disinterested in what was going on the ground. You were on holiday. The Prime Minister was on holiday. The Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office was on holiday. The Minister responsible for Afghanistan was on holiday.
Well, self-selecting reader polls in newspapers, I'm afraid, are not a particularly accurate barometer. But in terms of what we're doing at all material times, look, as Foreign Secretary, of course, with the benefit of hindsight, I wouldn't have gone away. But that's the luxury of commentators, not politicians. And if you're the Foreign Secretary, I'm travelling all the time for work purposes. I always need to be able to grip crises that arise, and that's what we were doing.
Do you regret not coming back earlier?
Look, of course, I said, with the benefit of hindsight, I would have been back earlier. But we were all surprised by the scale and the pace of the collapse of the situation in Kabul. And as I said, I was still doing all the things you would need me to do to focus on what really mattered. Engaging in the COBRA meetings, but critically securing, ramping up the Foreign Office presence in Kabul and working with the MOD, Ben Wallace, the Home Secretary, to make sure we could not just secure the airport, but get the people home. We got over 9,000 people home since that point in time. And I do think that demonstrates that we were on the job.
Just in terms of where we are with the repatriation, it's reported this morning that you've briefed MPs that in essence, all British nationals, all mono-nationals, people with just single British citizenship are basically out of the country. Is that accurate?
So there's a whole range of cases, but basically mono-nationals, so single nationality UK, who have got documentation, the lion's share, almost all of them that want to come out, have been brought home. The ones that are remaining, and we've done an amazing job, 2,500 UK nationals, if you go back to April, and remember it was in April, it wasn't just all starting in August, where we said you must leave the country, you should leave the country, we'll support you to do so. So we've seen 2,500 British nationals come back. What remains are rather complex cases, large family units where one or other may be documented or may be clearly a national, but it's not clear whether the rest of them are. So we've got a great team on the ground in Kabul and in King Charles Street in the FCDO checking and getting all of those residual cases on where they're eligible.
Obviously, again, for intelligence reasons, you will not be able to put a specific time on when we will be out of Afghanistan. I understand that. There are, however, suggestions that the withdrawal could begin in as little as 24 to 48 hours. Can you comment on that?
Well, look, for precisely the reason you gave, I'm not going to give the precise time. And what we do know is that we're working towards the end of the month. The military planners will work out how much time they need to withdraw their equipment, their staff. And what's really important is we'll make the maximum use of all the time we have left. Just to give you a sense, Niall, in the last 24 hours, I checked the numbers coming in, we've secured 2,000 back to the UK. So the system is operating at full speed, at full capacity, and we'll use every last remaining hour and day to get everyone we can back. The British nationals, the Afghans who work so loyally for us, we're getting the achieving scholars back, also women's rights defenders and journalists.
Indeed. But just in terms of the timeline, given that everyone from the Prime Minister down, I think you've said this as well, has basically made it clear that our military presence on the ground in Kabul is predicated on the Americans being there as well. We will have to come out before they do. It is fair to say, isn't it, then, on the basis of that timeline, that we may well be out by the end of the weekend?
Well, we'll work to the end of August, but we'll take back from that, you step back from that, the time that we need to withdraw our military operation. The military plans are firming that up. I can't give you the precise details because we want to make sure we use every last hour and day to keep this rate up. And we've done and again, I just stress, the teams on the ground and in King Charles Street, the Emergency Response Centre, done an amazing job. Since April, over 11,000 people given safe passage back to the UK. It's never been done before, and no country has done better.
We know that there will be people who will not be able to make it back before the August 31st deadline. Again, suggestions this morning that in some fashion, Kabul International Airport could continue to see people leaving on civilian flights. Have we had conversations with the Taliban about the possibility of this?
We do engage with the Taliban militarily on the ground and in Doha with the political representation. I think we would like to see Kabul Airport go back to being functional. That will require on the security on the ground. It'll require it to be done safely, and of course, it'll require the Taliban to live up to their assurances about allowing safe passage out. They've actually so far tried to be constructive, as we've seen with the numbers we've got, and tried to be constructive in their own way. And what we've then got to do is test them beyond the withdrawal date. Will they still allow safe passage as they've undertaken? Will they allow humanitarian groups the permissive environment to be able to operate? So there is a next stage of engagement, not recognition, engagement with the Taliban. And we will hold them very clearly to the assurances that they're already stating.
We heard it yesterday, though, that the head of the CIA travelled to Kabul to meet with the Taliban directly. Has something similar happened with the head of MI6? Has Richard Moore held any meetings with the Taliban?
Richard Moore's the head of MI6, not MI5, but we will engage diplomatically as well as through the military presence on the ground. I won't say too much more, but I do think what I would say now is it's important that we can convey our messages directly, and one of the ways that we've been able to handle this pretty epic evacuation is by being able to engage and convey clear messages. I do think that's important, and we want to make sure there's some continuity to that.
But just, can you at least give us a sense that the UK spy chief is engaging directly with the Taliban, trying to help secure the mission?
I'm not going to comment on either C or the nature or depth of our engagement, but as I mentioned, of course, on the ground in relation to the airport we engage with their British troops, the Taliban, Cheek and Jowl, and also via the political commission, which is based in Doha, we make sure that we can engage.
Speaking to your colleague Ben Wallace yesterday, I mean, he made it pretty clear, obviously, the security situation around the airport is pretty severe. And the closer we get to August the 31st, the greater the risk of some form of attack on the Allied forces there. Is it your understanding that Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, any of those other groups are extant in Afghanistan at the moment, are operational in Afghanistan?
I think we're obviously concerned about the way the prisons were emptied by the Taliban. So, of course, that means that we're ever vigilant about that potential risk. Clearly, one of the key things that we're saying to the Taliban is, first of all, to continue the safe passage of people out, British nationals and others. They're saying, the Taliban spokesman said yesterday he wanted to avoid the brain drain. Well, actually, in that case, they're going to need to be a lot more tolerant and inclusive than they've been before. And of course, the number one thing for us beyond safe passage will be making sure Afghanistan is never used as a base for terrorism again. And the Taliban has said that they're committed to that.
What are the levers we can use to exert some form of influence over the Taliban? You yourself have written about the potential for sanctions. We know, however, that perhaps as much as 60% of the Afghan state budget comes from money from overseas. If we are to turn off the taps in terms of the money, we will see an even greater humanitarian catastrophe, won't we? There's always the risk with sanctions that you need to target them in a way that protects the civilians and deals with the individuals that you want to hold to account. There's a whole range of things, the amount of aid that they'll need, the access to the international financial system, billions of pounds. The Taliban are saying they do not want the whole economy and social fabric such as it is in Afghanistan to collapse. That gives us leverage on them in relation to those key asks: safe passage out, never to allow Afghanistan to be used for terrorism, and indeed the permissive environment that they will need to provide if they want the UN NGOs to operate in Afghanistan. If they don't, we're not going to give aid to the Taliban. We would only do it via those third parties. We, of course, the G7 yesterday made it very clear. Look, taken together, we have an awful lot of economic and diplomatic clout. However, look at those countries which still have an embassy open on the ground there: Russia, China. If Afghanistan strikes bilateral deals with them, that does make it rather more difficult for the G7 to exert its influence, doesn't it?
Well, first of all, I think the PM was absolutely right. Take the lead, use the G7 presidency, get the G7 together, and the statement was pretty thorough, a starting point for the way forward. But you're right, we need a broader group of countries. I've been speaking to my Chinese opposite number. We are pressing the Russians as well, and indeed the countries in the region. I've spoken to the Indian, the Pakistani foreign ministers. If we want to exert maximum moderating influence on the Taliban, such as it is, and with all due scepticism, we're going to need to operate in a broader caucus. That's one of the reasons why we're pressing for a meeting of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, which includes China, Russia, as well as France, the UK and the US, in the coming days, to provide at least the contours of a way forward that we can all agree on.
A lot for you to be getting on with, so we'll let you get on with it. Dominic Raab, good to see you.
Good to talk to you.
Now, let's turn to our correspondent, Sally Lockwood, who's joining us from Doha. Morning, Sally. Clearly, you heard the Foreign Secretary there talking about the Taliban, talking again. Just give us an idea of what you're hearing in the region this morning.
Well, Qatar, of course, has become a really pivotal player in what's happening in Afghanistan, not only receiving hundreds, thousands of evacuees, and there's no cap on how many they're prepared to receive, as I understand it, but they're also already helping with talks between former Afghan government officials and also the Taliban, trying to broker some sort of unity government as to what the country will do next in terms of how it moves forward and how it's run. I met yesterday a senior US military officer. Just by chance, I asked him, how are you? How are things going? He got very emotional as he tried to answer that question. Let's not forget the people that are involved in this evacuation here. There's a huge US military presence here in Qatar helping with this evacuation, humanitarian crisis that's unfolding in Afghanistan. It's deeply personal for so many of those members of the military on the ground at the airport, trying to clear up the chaos that's unfolded in the last week or so. Now, of course, one of the reasons that President Biden has shown no interest yet in extending that 31st of August deadline is because the Taliban have made it clear that that is a red line for them. But also, we're watching the Taliban working very closely with US, British troops on the ground at the airport. They're cooperating for now. But we were warned in an interview by the Taliban here in Qatar that there would be consequences if we were to stay beyond that 31st of August deadline. So many members of the military have already been through so much in Afghanistan. They've lost friends, they've lost limbs there. This is deeply personal. And I think President Biden is all too aware that leaving them on the ground beyond the 31st of August, I think something very significant could change in terms of their relationship with the Taliban and expose military troops.
Sally, we will talk again later in the programme. For now, many thanks. But plenty still to come on the programme. We'll be paying tribute to the Rolling Stones drummer Charlie Watts with music journalist David Sinclair at 7:45. And we'll be getting plenty of reaction to the morning's interview with the Foreign Secretary. At 8:05, we'll be joined by this man, Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey. And a survey by Sky Sports News suggests that nearly a third of football fans from ethnically diverse communities who attend games have experienced racist abuse. Edlene John from the FA will be here at 20:00. Now, Sky News has been given access to the French patrols, funded by UK taxpayers, trying to stop the flow of migrants across the Channel. And despite repeated pledges by the Home Secretary and tens of millions of pounds being spent, the numbers making the journey continue to rise. Critics claim that French police and border officials just aren't doing enough. Our Europe correspondent Michelle Clifford has this special report.
Bon, il faut qu'on se dépêche. On va les taper.
From the darkness of the Calais coast, a French special police team prepares to break cover.
Police! Don't move! Police! Stop! Police!
They've been tracking men they believe to be migrants and asylum seekers planning to cross the Channel. The group take off. The police pursuit is not about arresting the men, but halting the next stage of their journey, intercepting the small boats they would have made the crossing in.
It was just a boat without motor, only, comment on dit des rames? Only that. Paddle.
This boat was almost certainly provided by smugglers who will have been paid thousands by those determined to make it to UK shores.
Another boat.
Nearby, what appears to be a child's inflatable, both taken away by the team, part funded by UK money. The following morning, and Sky News is on board a plane scouring the Calais coast for signs of potential cross-channel journeys.
Ok, je vois quelqu'un tout en haut de la dune. Milieu au bas, en fait, là-bas.
The pilot spots what he thinks are migrants or asylum seekers on the beach. Police are also alerted to a parked vehicle with a boat attached, and a search begins for potential smugglers. They and the boats are the target of this joint French-UK operation. Stop them, the pilot says, and people won't be put in danger.
Quand vous avez un bateau avec des enfants, des femmes, des hommes dedans qui sont en pleine mer ou qui vont pour partir, vous savez déjà qu'ils se mettent leur vie en danger. Donc on parle bien de personnes sur ces bateaux-là. Et ce qui est dramatique, c'est que des personnes sont prêtes à prendre énormément de risques.
Those who attempt the journey have usually taken huge risks just to get to French shores, many escaping war, others poverty. But the UK government is determined to stem what it calls the illegal traffic in people across the Channel, and has handed millions in recent months to the French to fund operations on land, in the air and at sea. We travel out with the maritime police, who regularly spot boats dangerously overloaded with people. They tell us the smugglers' tactic is to try to send multiple vessels out at once, making it difficult for officers to keep track on them all. And at sea, there are limits on what the police can actually do. Many on the UK side have accused the French of not doing enough to stop migrants and asylum seekers crossing the Channel. But once people are actually in boats and out at sea, the objective of the police is simply to preserve life. even if that means trailing, some would say escorting boats towards UK waters. The French insist they have no legal right to turn boats back. They can only offer help if needed, a position which has infuriated ministers in Britain and led many to question why the UK government is funding these operations at all.
Se positionnent, vous voyez, dans la bande des 300 mètres pour surveiller le littoral et le cas échéant, ils sont en mesure avec ce bateau-là de faire du secours. En mer, on ne fait que du secours et du sauvetage. On ne fait pas de digue en mer. On ne fait pas de lutte contre l'immigration irrégulière et clandestine en mer. On fait du secours et du sauvetage. On est là pour sauver les gens et empêcher qu'il y ait des accidents.
Despite the round-the-clock work on the French side to thwart the smugglers, record numbers of people have made it across the channel in small boats so far this year. The threat from the UK side of harsher penalties for those who enter illegally, seemingly little deterrent. Michelle Clifford, Sky News, Calais.
Now, also this morning, 12 miners are reported to have been killed after an accident in Colombia. They were working underground in the Topaga region when the shaft they were in was destroyed by a methane explosion. The government says it believes the reintroduction of beavers into the wild in England could help fight climate change. They've launched a consultation which could lead to more of them being released after becoming virtually extinct more than 400 years ago. And you can keep up to date with all the stories affected by the global climate on the Daily Climate Show. That's right here on Sky News, every weekday, 6:30 and 9:30. Some of the biggest names in music have been paying tribute to the Rolling Stones drummer, Charlie Watts. Sir Elton John called him the ultimate drummer on his Twitter page. The most stylish of men, Elton telling his followers it was a very sad day. The Stones frontman Mick Jagger shared just a single photo of Charlie Watts at his drum kit, feeling no need to add any words.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Say hi to the high pressure that will be sticking around for the rest of this week, keeping the weather fine and settled for most of the UK and Ireland. In fact, for some, it's going to be locally very warm today, particularly across western parts of Scotland. Temperatures will be high as well across parts of Northern Ireland and North West England, and respectable elsewhere. Quite a cloudy start for the northeast of Scotland, where it stays cloudy this afternoon with murky conditions, some light rain and drizzle. And also, it will take some time for it to brighten up around central and eastern parts of England, but eventually it will become brighter there. But at the same time, eastern coastal counties of England will become increasingly cloudy, breezy there. But elsewhere, mostly fine, dry, bright and warm.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Still to come. We'll get the very latest live from Afghanistan. And here again from the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, coming away in just a couple of minutes.
We couldn't give you a number in terms of how many are suffering from mental health problems, purely because it's not something that's really talked about within the industry. There's certainly a degree of stigma in what is still quite a macho industry, but everyone is suffering, everyone is finding it hard, everyone has had changes to terms and conditions and income, and it's a really tough time for aviation that just hasn't bounced back. We think about aviation as a community, as almost a vocation. And being a pilot is so much part of people's identity that when they aren't at work, when they aren't flying as often as they used to be, they lose that massive amount of their identity because it takes so long and so much commitment, so much money to become a pilot that it's so much of who somebody is. So Pilots Together have launched, as you say, this text service with Shout 85258. And this is a crisis service which allows pilots, regardless of their employment status, to text in and just discuss anything that they're struggling with. Beyond that, we do an awful lot as a charity to support people financially in terms of, as I say, the community. retraining. But overall, the industry, as I say, is a really challenging one in terms of getting pilots to speak up about their mental health at all. So this crisis service is something that we really hope will help people just be able to speak up, to say that they're having a tough time. We can realistically say that pilots are struggling in exactly the same way as everybody else. We are all human. We all suffer from exactly the same things that everybody else in every other industry is suffering from. It's just that traditionally we don't have a culture of speaking about mental health challenges, and that's something we really want to change.
Welcome back. The 2020 Paralympics are underway in Tokyo, full of excitement about this. We'll be getting you more detail of Great Britain's first medal in just a few minutes, but let's focus on how day one went. Joining us from Tokyo once again, NBC's sports reporter Heather Hoggox. Heather, good to see you again. So, day one done, how did it go?
It went great. So far, so good, Neil. Thank you. Tonight kicks off the first final session here at the Tokyo Aquatic Center as one of the most decorated Paralympic swimmers in history. Brazil's Daniel Dias begins his medal pursuit here in the men's 200 free. He has announced that Tokyo 2020 will be his last games as he hopes to add to his impressive collection of 24 Paralympic medals. As for what's already happened in wheelchair rugby, nicknamed Murder Ball due to its extreme physicality, the rivalry between Australia and the United States is expected to be as fierce as ever. Australia, who won gold in this event in Rio, is in search of a three-peat here in Tokyo, and today they open against Denmark in pool play. Now, how about some wheelchair basketball, a hugely popular sport here in Japan? On the women's side, the reigning gold medalists, Team USA, were upset in their opening game earlier today, losing 68-58 to the Netherlands. Meanwhile, the women of Team GB are in search of their first ever medal in wheelchair basketball, led by Robin Love, who believes, quote, the Paralympics is about thriving through diversity and adversity. Team GB will take on home team Japan tomorrow in its first game together in 18 months.
Heather, comprehensive as always. Keep enjoying yourself. We'll speak again very, very soon. Thanks for now. And if you've never watched Murder Ball, seriously, give it a go. It's fantastic. Now, the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, has denied claims that he continued his foreign holiday as the Taliban seized power in Afghanistan. President Biden has again insisted US troops will leave by August the 31st, as thousands still try to leave the capital, Kabul. Well, a short time ago, Mr. Raab told me that claims he refused to come back to the UK sooner were untrue.
We discussed the matter. I agreed to come back on Sunday. I'm not going to add further to the speculation around that. But the idea, some of the reporting, some of the assertions you just put to me, just not true. But we were focused overwhelmingly on securing the airport, making sure, and I was engaged in meetings, the stuff about me being lounging around on the beach all day, just nonsense. The stuff about me paddleboarding, nonsense. The sea was actually closed. It was a red notice.
Our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, was lurking in the wings listening to that interview. Tamara, what more did we learn, apart from, of course, that the sea was closed that day?
Well, Dominic Raab very defensive about how much work he was doing on that holiday and to claims that the government was asleep at the wheel 48 hours before the fall of Kabul. He, the Prime Minister, the senior civil servant of that department and his junior minister all on holiday as the Taliban made their lightning advance. And essentially what Dominic Raab was saying was that he was fully engaged in all the Cobra meetings, that the Prime Minister spoke to him on Friday and they agreed he would come back Sunday, and that no time was lost in terms of the evacuation. He says that no country has done better in getting their nationals out, and the pace has increased so much. He said that in the last 24 hours, 2,000 people have got out. He was unsurprisingly cagey about exactly how much longer we may have left. Conditions on the ground are very uncertain. Of course, you don't want to cause even more panic among a very desperate group of people, but certainly the message is there is not long to go now, and they're pulling all the stops out to try and get everyone who it has been processed onto those planes, and if they can't get onto the planes now, hopefully try and secure ways for them to get out later. Just on that topic, the airport, Kabul International Airport, we asked the Foreign Secretary about the potential of civilian flights. I mean, so much of that depends on the Taliban themselves, don't we? We already know, we were speaking to Sally Lockwood about it just a few minutes ago, that they are becoming increasingly concerned about the brain drain that in essence is ongoing. Yes, and the talk about evacuating now judges, journalists, human rights advocates. They're taking out so many people, and he says the Taliban are concerned about it and that we do have leverage because we have billions of dollars in Western bank accounts that can be used to try and hold them to some of these promises. But as we saw yesterday, Boris Johnson asking the US president for an extension of the troops being there, failing to get that. A lot of this is going to hinge on the West working together towards particular goals, and no one really knows how engaging with the Taliban is going to go. Yes, we can hold money against them, but how much they'll want to cooperate with that process is still very much unknown. Certainly is. Tamara, for now, thank you. But let's return to Afghanistan and the commitment by President Biden to end the rescue operation at Kabul airport by August the 31st. Means uncertainty for those still trying to escape. So far, around 70,000 have managed to leave, but thousands more are still hoping to get out. Shukla Zadran is a student in Afghanistan and was the country's youth representative at the United Nations last year, and she joins us on the programme. Good to see you this morning. I wonder, given what we have been hearing over the past few days from in and around Afghanistan, how you are feeling about the Taliban takeover of your country?
Well, thank you very much for having me. As an Afghan citizen, this is very clear that I am still in a state of disbelief and shock. We have lost everything that we have struggled for since past 2 decades, and when the Afghanistan or the Kabul was collapsed by Taliban, it was a very dark and sad day for every Afghan, and especially for Afghan youth who have been a main part of the recent developments and recent achievements. So I'm feeling sad, but I believe that we need to accept the reality. We need to adjust ourselves with the circumstances, and we need to amplify our voices for better changes and betterments for our society and generation.
What, though, does this new Taliban government mean for women like yourself? You were attending university. Do you think there is any potential for that to continue?
Well, considering their recent press release and press conferences, their spokesperson, Zabiullah Mujahid, has said that they are going to respect Afghan women's rights and freedoms, and they are going to allow Afghan women to continue their career and jobs and education. But, I believe that we still need time to be sure that they are actually doing what they are saying. We really need assurance from them and from international community that there will be no compromises when it comes to Afghan women's rights.
Do you attribute any blame for what we are seeing in and around Kabul and in Afghanistan at the moment to the United States, to the United Kingdom?
I believe that each and every party involved in the past 2 decades war of Afghanistan is responsible for whatever happened in Afghanistan to Afghan people. Since past 2 decades, NATO, United States of America, and its allies have they have came to Afghanistan with a mission of counter-terrorism and maintaining peace and order and law in Afghanistan. But in past 2 decades, they have committed miserable war crimes. And now, at this era of time, at this point of time, they have left Afghans to a very uncertain destiny. They did not fulfill their promises and their responsibilities towards Afghans. The unwise and immediate decision of withdrawal, and now that they are just dealing with Taliban, totally ignoring the needs and concerns of Afghans. All of this is an indication that they were not actually our strategic partners. And I strongly believe, as Afghan youth representative to the United Nations, I strongly believe that we have been betrayed and we have been sold out by everyone, by international community, by United States of America, and by our own political leaders.
Shkula, just a final question to you. Do you see yourself remaining in Afghanistan in the long term?
I have always said that I really, really want to stay here. I don't want to leave my country, but it depends on the circumstances. It will depend on the situation. If I feel that I can contribute to this country, I can serve my people, and they are allowing me to stay here, to stay safe and to stay productive here, then I will never leave my country. I don't want to leave my country. I don't want to leave my people. But everything is dependent on the situation and whether they are really allowed meaningfully participate in the politics and decision making. We really want meaningful inclusion into everything and decision makings. So if that happens, not only me, but every Afghan woman will love to stay here because this is our country. At the end of the day, this is our home.
Shkula Zadran, we have to leave it there, but we wish you well. Do stay safe, and thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Still to come after the break.
Wembley winner, Mr. Charlie Watts.
We'll be paying tribute to the Rolling Stones drummer Charlie Watts with the music journalist Dave Sinclair. That's coming next.
This is a forgotten front line. They are dying here.
Here it comes. Cut.
Boy, have we got some interesting ways of showing you what's going on.
Their message to us, get ready.
Nothing like apocalypse.
Instructing you to stay at home.
I can't believe we did that. It's pretty special, isn't it?
They say they can't go back to Myanmar yet. If they do, they fear they'll be killed.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
If there is a bigger explosion, this area would be in the danger zone.
These crackers
traffic jam snaked for hours up and down this hillside. It means pressures aid can't access those in need. You can see the depth of the water. If you have a look in front of us, there are people wading through it. I think experiencing the 2 million person march in Hong Kong, that was a moment.
I don't like the Chinese government. It's cruel.
It was real people power in action.
Police have been firing tear gas and rubber bullets.
See fires all around us here, and just one of them is the size of around 31,000 football pitches. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Bangkok.
Did you know that if we all work together, we can really make a difference to the air pollution around our schools?
Yeah, we should really do that.
It'll be largely dry and fine today with sunny spells for most places. However, northeast Scotland will be cloudy, murky and cool, and it'll take a while for central England to brighten up. Later, eastern coastal counties of the UK will become cloudy too. It'll be a warm day in the sunshine though, especially across western Scotland. So taking a look at the air pollution levels on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being very high, most places will stay at a low level of 1 to 3. However, with light winds, locally generated pollutants may allow for isolated moderate levels for central parts of Scotland.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Now, musicians have been paying tribute to Rolling Stones drummer Charlie Watts, who died yesterday.
Mr. Charlie Watts.
Well, the 80-year-old was, of course, one of the longest-serving members of the band. Sir Elton John described him as the ultimate drummer on his Twitter page. He continued, the most stylish of men, told his followers it was a very sad day. Our fellow drummer Ringo Starr, of course, from the Beatles, said, "God bless Charlie Watts, sending peace and love to his family." Musician and co-songwriter for the Rolling Stones, Keith Richards, just shared this single picture, an empty drum kit, no one behind it, with that closed sign at the front. Similar from the bandmate and frontman Mick Jagger. He shared this photo of the musician. Joining us now, music journalist David Sinclair. David, great to see you this morning. Hope you're well. Your thoughts on the passing of Charlie Watts. Clearly, this was a figure of huge significance in British music and indeed in music just in general.
Well, absolutely, yeah. One of the founders, if you like, of the whole modern rock generation, and it's a terrible wrench. My feelings are. You know, we all know the Stones have been going for nearly 60 years as the same band, and they're all approaching their 80s, but you sort of imagine that they're indestructible somehow. And for this to happen, obviously it's perfectly predictable, but it's still a terrible shock. And I think my feelings at the moment are just, can this be true, you know? But obviously it is true, it's very sad. And you kind of look back on what he's done and what he's achieved and what the band have achieved through his, you know, with his agent. And it's just a tremendous story and a tremendous sense of loss at this great player that has gone the way of all things.
As often happens at times like this, when figures of such significance are lost, people have been sharing their stories of Charlie Watts. My director, and I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning this, met him at the airport and ended up going out for dinner with the man. You've interviewed him yourself. What was he like?
Oh, well, he's a wonderfully understated kind of character, actually, considering the world that he moved in. Unlike Keith Richards and Mick Jagger, he's kind of a very sort of calm and equable sort of bloke. You know, you'd sort of meet him and you'd think, wow, this is the guy in the greatest rock and roll band in the world, seriously? But he had a twinkle, he had a great sort of sparkle in his eyes, but he could be quite kind of lugubrious, you know. He'd sort of always play down the achievements of the band, his own abilities as a drummer. He was a very modest man, really. And he was always kind of very relaxed. You know, you'd see him, he'd always be very, very stylishly dressed, but he would slump in a sofa, a very relaxed sort of way, as if he was just sort of just chewing the fat over on a kind of sunny afternoon with you. And it was an extraordinary mixture of things, really. And he always seemed to be slightly apart from the mayhem and the madness of the world that he inhabited. And he was always very genial, very pleasant guy to kind of come across. But obviously, a great rock and roll star at the same time. A lot of charisma.
David, what has surprised me is someone who, of course, has known the work of the Rolling Stones, but certainly not followed his career as closely as people like you. What has surprised me is reading interviews with him, previous interviews, is how often dismissive he was about parts of the back catalogue, that he kind of wasn't ashamed of it, but, you know, he often commented that he'd rather be playing some jazz at some points. But, you know, he was the person who provided the backbeat, the beat for some of the greatest tunes that British musicians have ever produced.
Well, that's right, exactly. And I think that was part of his appeal, that he never really bought into the whole myth of the Stones in the way that everybody else does. He always seemed to regard it as a bit of a lark, you know. He was very, very into his jazz music. He made several solo albums of his own, which was far more, you know, a lot different from the Stones' music. It was jazz. And that was his first love. But obviously, his commitment to the band could never ever have been in doubt. He was in the band for almost 60 years, come on. And he never let them down once. And he provided some pile-driving stuff. I mean, you know, if you think of the big hits of the Stones, Brown Sugar and Honky Tonk Women, and those tracks are just incredibly rhythmically driven. They're the tracks that get everyone on the dance floor straight away. And that was his contribution to the band, the rhythmic foundation. It was incredible. But in terms of his feeling about being a rock star and being a member of the greatest rock and roll band in the world and all that kind of thing, he just thought that was a lot of nonsense. He was very, very sort of kept his feet very much on the ground in that sense.
David, I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it there. Good to talk to you this morning. Thanks for sharing your memories of Charlie Watts. Good to see you. Time for us to have a quick look at the weather.